So it is a pleasure to see you again. I would love to hear, Isabelle, where are you actually right now in the world?
I am in St. George, Utah right now, soaking in some
Nice.
sun. Well, at least I was soaking in sun until it started raining. Getting some swing dancing in, some rock climbing. It's been nice.
Oh, I love that. You're swing dancing. I love that. That's so much fun.
Have you ever swing danced before?
Yeah, lots of different kinds of dancing for sure. Rock climbing, I'm a little scaredy cat. So even though I live in the mountains, not happening. No, not
Mm.
me. But so I could always start. I absolutely could always start. Literally, everyone is doing that, or they're downhill skiing, or they're I cross country ski, or they're doing some bicycling or biking. I guess nobody calls it bicycling, but mountain biking. Lots of fun places to explore here too. So you're in Utah right now, and just as an introduction, in case people haven't already met you, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. And as a quick note, I've had a bit of a sore throat, so please excuse if my voice breaks or if I have to cough for a minute. So,
Yeah.
um, Isabel Robledo. I'm 18 years old, and I'm the co-founder co-founder of Making Mindfulness Fun, which is a mindfulness, consciousness, and empowerment platform where I teach you to how to understand who you are so that you can be the creator of your reality instead of a victim where you have to always react to your surroundings.
Love that. That is amazing. It really is. I think, like, wow, that's all I have to say. 18 and you're really comfortable on camera. That in itself is a feat. And you're very well spoken and very wise. So it's a pleasure to have you here. And we're going to chat about your present program or the program that you have just launched or you are about to launch, and also about Enneagram and how we can use that in our families. So, where do you want to start?
Well, I think it's really important to make sure people understand the Enneagram. Do you figure everyone understands the Enneagram well, or do I need to recover it so
Yeah,
that
do a recap, although I always speak to it. But, anyways, not everybody knows it as well as you and I.
so the Enneagram is a personality typing system consisting of 9 types. And there's a lot of personality typing systems in this world nowadays where, like you can do a BuzzFeed quiz on what kind of potato chip or Disney princess you are. You can find out your astrology. So what makes the Enneagram important? Uh, we have to backtrack to answer this question. You have to backtrack to what makes your personality. Between the ages 0 and 7, and then 7 and 14, we form our programming. We are basically computers, and we need a software in order to process and go about being in reality. And if we don't have this programming, we just wouldn't be able to function. So this is where our survival instincts come in, where we know to run away from danger and to like not touch a hot pan or else you'd burn yourself. These are beliefs instilled. And these beliefs eventually create our personality. Someone eventually found that there's 9 different personalities from your childhood programming that you can create. And so they call these in the Enneagram the childhood wounds. So of the 9 types, each type in childhood, mainly from ages 0 to 7, and then a little bit more from 7 to 14, they feel like they were told a belief. They reacted to a trauma. So really quick note on that. Everyone has trauma. Some people, unfortunately, worse than others, but the brain processes it all the same, any traumatic experience. So as children, we have a trauma, maybe a parent yelled at us or something worse happened, and we formed a core belief. And this created our personality because we now act from this belief to attain a core desire and avoid that danger. And so, for example, the 9, they experience a situation where they know they're not supposed to have conflict or rock the boat. And so now they know they want harmony and they want to avoid conflict at all costs. And so they create an entire personality around how they can be more harmonious. And that's why they're so easygoing and peaceful, etc. So the Enneagram is all about our childhood programming, and everyone has childhood programming. It's inescapable. Knowing your Enneagram can be extremely powerful for 2 reasons. One, it keeps you aware of what the programming was in your childhood that might be limiting you. Because if we act from a place of always our wounds, we're not going to quite always be able to achieve our highest desires. And at the same time, because our trauma is not always quite escapable, and we're always going to have that core desire for the rest of our lives, we can identify what it is we want most and how we can achieve that in the most positive sense possible. And that is what the Enneagram does with its 9 types, its wings, its tri-types, and its growth numbers.
Damn, girl. You are you're really well spoken. I'm like, wow. How long have you been doing YouTube videos and teaching in general?
I started teaching digitally in 2020, but I think it also has a lot to do with the fact that my mom and dad were entrepreneurs. They ran a gymnastics facility. And so as a homeschooler, I would always just go to the gym 24/7 and just hang out there. And I got to experience them working a lot one-on-one with kids and working one-on-one, having good social skills with other adults. And so
Yeah.
I think I picked up on a lot of that instead of just being in a school system where I would be sitting at a desk and told to be quiet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I could go down so many rabbit holes of why I think it doesn't matter really what approach homeschool families or unschool families take with their kids. There's something about the attachment that creates confidence. But that's a total rabbit hole. And mostly because I'm your mother's age-ish, I'm guessing, I'm like, because I have a 21 and a 19-year-old myself and a 17 and a 14-year-old, I'm like, wow, really well spoken. Amazing, really. It's very good. So the teaching element to what you just spoke, I mean, that is spot on. That's a really great way to explain that. I'm going to use that and cite you. But that upload, essentially, it's like a software program to a hardware, and those core woundings that we have right off the top, they influence how we perceive things. I
Mhm.
have a 9 daughter as well. I've got an 8 daughter. I haven't figured out my son who's 14. He's kind of all over the place. And I have a 7 daughter who I thought was a 4. But I know in our community we have a whole bunch of, let's see, we have 3, 4s, and 5. So I'm curious if you notice when you're coaching clients, if you have a particular Enneagram number that's more likely to come to you for coaching. Have you noticed that?
Yes, I definitely have. And I connect this a lot to like the law of attraction. I don't know if you're very familiar with that or not, but I think in general, I was talking about this with my family and how certain Enneagram types in certain levels of stress and growth tend to attract other types. I've noticed a lot, not in just my career, but in life in general. I attract a lot of fours. And I think the reason for this is the 4 wants the most to know who they are and express their individuality and feel important in who they are. And I've naturally, as a 9, owned that so well with my upbringing and my personality. I'm just go with the flow. Everyone seems to like me, so to say. I'm just like own who I am. And so they get attracted to that energy because they like how it feels, how they want to feel.
Yeah.
As far as coaching, though, I've noticed a lot of other 9s as well as 7 or as well as 4s have come to me a lot.
Yeah, that thank you for sharing that. That is very interesting. I definitely see a lot of 4s in my world, or 2s. That's something that I see a lot too. So as a 9, I have a daughter who's a 9 and had a significant moment. I won't go into details because this is recorded for the world, but she had a significant moment where she had to be very assertive in a high risk kind of scenario that required her to address conflict with someone that was truly had a potential to influence the outcome of what she's doing right now. And that was a huge moment for her to overcome as a hurdle. And that I'm like, wow, what an opportunity. But how challenging that is for the 9, the very diplomatic, very peaceful, let's not have conflict kind of 9. So that was interesting to see. So tell me, we were going to talk about 2 things, about the coaching program that you're going to launch, and also how different Enneagram types connect or collide in our homeschool families. Where do you want to start?
We can start about talking about how they collide and how you need to really, you can't just know your Enneagram type. You have to know everyone's because dynamics are so different.
Yeah.
So if you want, I can just dive into that like with thoughts of what I have in the first place.
Yeah,
So
do it.
So knowing your own Enneagram type alone is a very hard process because we tend to perceive ourselves as our ego selves rather than our core programming. I often find that you found your real Enneagram type when you kind of go, ouch,
Yeah.
that's me.
Yeah, me too. I
And
was
so
a 7 for a very long time because 7s are fun and happy. And actually, I'm a 2 and I'm proud. Who knew? And I didn't like that.
And I thought I was a 5 because I thought I was intelligent and witty and smart and reserved, but I'm not reserved at all. If anyone has met me, they would not describe me as reserved, but 9 and proud over here.
Yeah.
And so to preface this a little bit, I live in a family of 7. I'm the middle child. I have 2 older siblings and 2 younger,
Yeah.
2 of which are very loud and 2 of which are quieter. And I have a type 8 mom. So very loud energies surrounding my type 9 self. And so I've learned a lot in the last few years about how our dynamics really play out, because what makes the Enneagram so great is once backing up a little, because everyone's driven by their core wounds, no matter what, we're gonna let our programming rule us, because that's how we stay safe. And so naturally, in every dynamic that we interface with, we're going to act from our programming. So let's say theoretically, a type 5 was to interact with a type 9. The type 5's core desire is to preserve their resources and feel capable. The last thing they want is to be in harm's way because they didn't know enough or have enough. So let's say the 5 is angry at the 9 because the 9 is hoarding their time, so to say, because their sin is sloth and they're, just sitting on the couch, indulging in potato chips, not wanting to do the dishes, and they forgot to go get groceries. The 5 is going to feel threatened by this because they can't help but act from the programming of, I need my resources, and you just harm that. And so now they're going to go into their stress as a 5, and the 5 moves to the 7 in stress, and they're going to start indulging and become irresponsible as well and draw away from the people that they want to connect with. And so this can also turn into them going into unhealthy indulgence, where they go to maybe alcohol or something like that, or even TV, to just numb the pain, to make it feel like, oh, I'm good, I have resources, I feel something. And at the same time, now the 9 is going to look at the 5 and be like, oh, well, you're mad at me, you're indulging over there, and I feel like you're not protecting my harmony. So now I'm going to go into further conflict and internal conflict and numb myself even more. So knowing not only your Enneagram type, but knowing your spouse's and knowing your children's are going to help you navigate your life and make it so that everyone can fulfill their core desire. Because in the positive, this can be very powerful, and very much it has been in my household, where I realized I was a 9 that wanted harmony. And I know that there's healthy and unhealthy ways to do that. I know when I'm at my worst, the last thing I want is to be around my family. I want to go hide in my own trailer, and I want to just light a candle, make it comfortable, leave me alone, and give me all the sugar and indulgence. And I'm going to avoid work. But in the positive, I can make time for a healthy morning routine where I get to be by myself, and they respect that because they know it's what I need. And then I can merge with them and help them and use my growth of the number 3 to work on our goals together, because they are all not only my parents and my siblings, but they're also, some of them are my co-founders and work business partners. So I have to work with them and step into that leadership role in order to do so. So knowing your Enneagram so much is all about knowing the programming. And by knowing the programming, you can interact with your family better. And there's some that are going to get along better than others, but in general, it just starts with knowing your own type and what your stress and growth triggers will be.
Yeah, let's talk about the growth and stress triggers. Okay, so when you're talking about a 5, and so I actually know the 5 the least in my real world. I'm learning about it because I have certain clients that are 5s. But tell me more about the stress triggers. You said that they go to, was it 7? Or did I?
Yeah, it is actually very interesting because I've seen there's some slight variance for each stress number. And part of this, I think, has to do with the fact that you can technically move towards both numbers in stress, because each number is connected to 2 numbers, and it'll look like this or this. And you can take on 2 separate behaviors, but in the end, the stress response is still the same because it's the programming being triggered. So the Enneagram 5, which is always reserved, cerebral, logical, very much robotic, so to say, if you're going to stereotype them, they move towards the 7 in stress. And as a general rule, this means that they become gluttonous. And because their core desire is resources and to have all the knowledge, have all the capability, make sure that they have their bank account full, make sure their fridge is full, make sure that they have their time alone. When they don't get that and that feels threatened, they move towards being like the 7 of, I just need to feel positive. And so they'll avoid responsibility in order to feel that sense of resources. And so they become very gluttonous and indulgent in whatever it is that they feel they need to feel capable and feel like they have their resources. So it's not necessarily that they'll become like a 7, the life of the party always. They won't all of a sudden be like, hey, social, like, have you met my friends? But they will always, a 5 in stress will always move towards indulgence, and they can even struggle even more to take action. Some 5s I've met do go towards that fun lover side because they are capable of some extroversion, as every human being is, and they can become indulgent in social settings to feel like, okay, I have my people and my people like me, and that is my resource I need. So it's more common with 5 and 6.
Oh, interesting. So sometimes when you're talking about gluttony, because it's instinctive to think that means sugar or that means whatever forms of food is usually what I'm thinking. But you also mean, I know this about 5s, that they can go down rabbit holes of research and never come out of the library or out of Google or out of whatever. So it could be that, or even you said wanting to always have a lot of quiet time or separate space.
Yes, because the 5 in general wants resources, and they do tend to find it through knowledge. As a general rule, I believe that most 5s are introverted, or at least introverted dominant. And
Yeah.
so you often find that gluttonous nature through like attaining knowledge or through alone time.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Tell me a little bit about 3s. Then how do 3s interact with their worlds? Or do you have an example?
Yeah, so I have so as a quick recap, because I have 7 out of 9 Enneagrams in my household, and I've interacted with the other 2 quite a bit. So I have a youngest sister who is a 6, a younger brother who's a 7. Then there's me, the 9, and then I have an older brother and sister who are a 3 and a 5. My sister is the 3, my brother's the 5, and then my parents are a 2 and an 8. Surprisingly, my dad is the 8. But I'm familiar with the 3 because I spend a lot of time around my sister. She is my partner in crime. So the 3 is very actually similar to a 5. They can appear very similar growing up, and it can be hard to tell them apart now, especially in males. I've found it can be a bit hard to tell male 5s from male 3s apart. And it's because they do have a bit of a similar core desire. Again, their stress response will be different to some extent. Where the 5 desires capability and resources, the 3's core desire is to be the best, to achieve, to win. Everything for them is wrapped up in success. And this is because they grow up with the belief that if they're not the best, then they are not enough. And so they think the only way they can go about living is to succeed, which is also very similar to the type 1. But the type 1 wants perfection, and they tend to seek it more in organization, whereas the 3 is all about the self-drive. So 3s in general, especially as kids, will be extremely driven, focused, goal-oriented. They don't let themselves rest. They can be like the pro athletes or the all-star players. They succeed well. They are very hard on themselves for failure. And I think it's really important to pinpoint a type 3 kid from a young age, because, or at least knowing when a child is a 3, because they're going to give themselves a lot of pressure to succeed in whatever it is that they do.
Yeah.
Not that the type 3 shouldn't succeed at all. Everyone needs to fulfill their core desire, but the 3 needs to find healthy ways that are intrinsically driven, so to say, to achieve, rather than being wrapped up in the external success. Because I think a lot of 3s as kids tend to they take on what they see in the parents potentially, where, oh, I need to be thinking about my future. And so they achieve because it's going to set themselves up for the future. And then they find themselves exhausted, tired, and don't really let themselves have fun, maybe with their peers or their family or their friends. Yeah. So the 3 in stress will have that belief triggered of, I need to be the best. And they actually move towards the 9 in stress, which means that they basically become so burnt out that, similar to the 5, instead of being indulgent, but they become tired. Yeah. And I think this would be healthy for them because they need the rest and relaxation, but they embrace the 9's negative manners. So you'll find a 3 in stress, like an example from my sister, when she's at her worst, she'll just lay on the floor listening to music and like unable to like take care of herself because she's so burnt out. So a 3 in stress goes to negative forms of relaxation that are not really restful, but they're more numbing.
Yes. Interesting. So two thoughts I have is, as a 3 mom, like if you were to speak to a 3 that's a homeschool mom, now this child is grown up and she's taking care of other kids. What are you likely to see in how she engages in an unhealthy way? And what would you encourage her to do in a healthy way?
So I think as a general rule for Enneagram 3 moms is that there's an internal pressure for not them only to be the best mom, but to be the best everywhere in life. And I think this is something I've noticed a lot with 3s is because their core desire is to achieve, I think they struggle a lot with mom guilt, motherhood, because they feel like they love their dreams and visions and goals so much that they're always going to feel internally like they're not being enough for their kids. And so then they can talk themselves into either that they're never enough for the kids and continuing on their goals, or vice versa. They drop their goals entirely and focus on being a mom.
Right.
And this is good, but it's not necessarily going to keep them happy because the 3 needs goals in order to be happy. They just need the right goals. So I think my number one piece of advice to 3 moms is, what are the goals that matter to you most? And how can you accept the fact that you're going to be a worthy mom no matter what? Because the 3 is also part of the shame triad, which we can go into triads later. But what it means is that 3s struggle a lot with feelings of shame and unworthiness. And so as a mom, you can constantly feel like as a 3 that you're never going to be enough for your kids. And stereotypically, I think for really bad 3s in stress, they can put a lot of pressure on their kids to succeed. But I think a lot of 3 moms overcome that before then. And it's more the inner critic they have to deal with.
Oh, very interesting. So wise. Can I hear an amen, ladies? Like, wow, that really, wow. What would you say to the 5 mom then?
This is very interesting. I've rarely met 5 women, so it's a bit hard for me to like pinpoint them. But I think for 5 moms, make sure you're making time to be alone, because I think for some types, it has a lot to do with their self-care is more important for them to work on. And other types, they have to work more on their approach with their kids. But for 5, you need your resources. And naturally, kids are going to make your resources drained. So think about what really charges you and fuels you and make time for that. And also, you might have a kid who's more of an emotional type. Maybe they're 4 or 9 who wants to just express all the feelings and you don't know how to deal with it. And don't underestimate the power of just a nod, and I understand, and making them feel like they're heard. It doesn't take much.
Yeah, beautiful. So when it comes to typing kids, is there some suggestion or some, knowledge that you have about when or if you should do that? Because I've heard conflicting advice. I naturally want to type them anyway. What do you think?
Yeah. So I've heard a lot of conflict about this one too, because when I worked in 2020, I started a course for mindfulness for kids. And naturally, I wanted to mentally know what their Enneagram was. And so I started broaching the subject afterwards, once we were done with our sessions about finding their kids' Enneagram. And some of them were more hesitant because they didn't know if they wanted to put their kids into a box. And that is a definitely a valid fear. We don't want to box our kids in and tell them, you have to be this when they're not that at all. But instead, it's so for starters, finding their Enneagram with a lens of curiosity, I think is just the most important, especially because when we're trying to find maybe our kids' Enneagrams, we're like, I got to find it now so that I can start now. But trust the process, you'll eventually get there and you're doing great already. But as far as the system I found for finding kids' Enneagrams, here's how my mental system works. And I think it works pretty good for other people. First, you can identify if your child's introverted or extroverted, and that narrows it down a lot. It's pretty easy to tell when a child's going to be a 7 or a 9 or one of those louder types.
Sure is. Yeah.
And if someone's a 5 or a 1, you're going to tell more easily.
Yeah.
And I think so you can probably tell your child's Enneagram. You don't want to type them, I would say, before 7.
Okay.
For sure. Potentially even up until 14. And there's a reason for this. Sometimes, you can probably narrow it by 7, you can narrow it down to a few types. but there's still a possibility until they're 14 that they're going to swing. So if you had met me when I was 7, you would have thought I was a 7. I was labeled Little Miss Intensity. I just had all the energy in the world. I wanted to be friends with everyone. I gave everyone hugs. I was so excited, so passionate. But then around 10 years old, 11 years old, my other friends that I was around, I kind of got more of a programming to be more peaceful and tame myself a little. And so I very much became a 9. And what I think my parents could have done with this information, which they kind of did do without even knowing the Enneagram, but if they had thought I was a 7, they could have been, oh, she wants positivity. She's going to struggle with her emotions. So let's nurture that. And that would still be very similar to the 9. The 9, they're just going to notice wants more downtime and time alone.
Right.
But so when it comes to typing your kids, if they're younger than 7, I would just keep an open mind and like notice and like see where they're tending towards, because eventually they're going to have a programming either way. But won't quite know until they're around 7 to 10 to 14 years old.
Yeah.
And then noticing what it is they seem to crave. We can also get caught in the trap of looking at behaviors. So common mistypes, not only amongst children, but amongst adults, are 6s and 8s. 6s always think they're 8s. 4s always think they're 7s. 3s and 1s have a hard time telling each other apart. And 9s tend to think that they're 5s or 4s.
Nobody wants to be a 2.
Like you know it too when you see it. They're like, oh, I'm the nice servant. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
There's a reason that I went down the path that I did. All the things that I write, how I coach, all of it. Yeah, I'm a 2.
And sometimes 2s think they're 9s. I have seen that a few times. When my dad took the test, he thought he was a 9. When in fact very much a 2. And again, they're similar. So if you know that general, I think of it as like passive versus aggressive types. In my head, like the 9, the 7, the 2, they're very passive people. They want to keep peace and harmony and positivity. I actually believe that there's a tri-type for those 3 that's called the positivity triad. And so they all want to keep a positive outlook. The 5, the 3, and the 1 keep a very rational outlook.
Yes.
And then there's the 4, 6, and the 8, which tend to be more like, no, this is what I believe and this is what I stand for. So knowing general things can help. But so once you figure out if your child's like more introverted or extroverted, you'll know if they're maybe on the 7, the 9, potentially even the 4 scale, or if they're more introverted, they're on the 5 or the 1 scale. And then you can kind of pinpoint, okay, they kind of have this general desire. So when it comes to then refining it further, I look a lot at the 3 triads. So there's 3 triads in the Enneagram, and they're related to the 3 emotions that we tend to struggle with. And based on your Enneagram, you tend to struggle with 1 more. So there's anger, fear, and shame. So 9 Enneagram types divide by 3 in each group. The anger triad, which is 9, 8, and 1, they struggle a lot with anger, and they tend to act out of anger. And I think this is actually a great indicator because 9 children often can be seen as 4s or 7s, but you're going to tell that deep down they have this explosive anger that can sometimes turn on. You're like, where did that come from? Whoa, I was the child that was like mainly peaceful, but I distinctly remember in my childhood, I would just randomly get to the point where I would throw remote controllers, and I was like, wow.
I know. Except that as a parent of a 9, when that's happened, because I've had an 8 to start, I was like, girl, that's quite enough with the aggression. And when it came with, and then my second was a 9. And when she would have her moments, I'd be like, oh, that's so funny. She just got mad. instead of feeling reactive to it, it would be like, what just happened?
It's just like,
yeah, you probably got more grace than maybe other siblings. I don't know. But in my world, as a 2 watching a 9, I was like, wow, she got mad.
Yeah, I remember because my mom is generally, as an 8, the kind of person to let out her anger. Yeah. And already with 5 siblings, there's like, it's a lot to juggle the emotions. So I do remember in childhood when I would get angry, generally I would get angry because I'd repressed my needs or desires for so long as a 9. I'd be angry and I would just feel guilt myself for anger because I was not anger. And so my parents would sometimes potentially tell me like, you can't be angry, you can't react like that. But I'd also be like, why are you so angry in the first place? So finding your child's Enneagram, definitely look at the triads. So if they're in the anger triad, they're going to, as a 9, they're going to repress the anger for super long and then all of a sudden explode.
Mhm.
8 will naturally just let the anger trickle out so they can seem very aggressive. And the 1 has strong self inner critic. And so this can come out as resentment towards themselves. So very similar to the 3, how they seem hard on themselves, except the 1 will go more towards anger, whereas the 3 will just feel guilty and sad and get beaten down.
Yeah.
That's the anger triad. Then there's the fear triad, which is types 5, 6, and 7. And their core emotion that they struggle with is fear. So if you have a child who deep down gets really scared of things or like needs to be overly prepared or is afraid to take risks, they could definitely be in the fear triad.
Yeah.
And so the 7 deals with fear by running from it. And that's why their core desire is positivity. My younger brother, an example, who's a 7, anytime there's conflict in the house, he immediately throws jokes on it. And everyone in the room is always like, dude, like, why are you making jokes? Like, this is a serious conversation. He's like, I'm uncomfortable. Please.
I have that child too. So I'm like, no. But it is their default. Yeah. And it would be hilarious on a TV show, just not in real life.
It's like 7s in a way sometimes think they're in like a sitcom where everything's
Exactly.
like a liner.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, for sure.
and so like I honestly think that like spotting a 7 child is the easiest thing in the world because
Absolutely. You can see it in the smiles before they're 3 on
yes,
photos. Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. Really big smile.
I like call them like the human version of a golden retriever puppy. So they just like have so much spirit. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it'll be easy to tell if your child's a 7.
Yeah.
And there's the Enneagram 6 child. So they are also struggle with fear and they deal with it by trying to be prepared, having the information, and not taking risks. The stereotype of a 6 is like Piglet from Winnie the Pooh, but they don't always appear this hand rubbing worrier. They can for sure.
I know
But they
one that does. Yes.
And they can also appear as just like needing to be prepared and very loyal. So my youngest sister is a 6, and she can appear in an 8 in some ways because she's so assertive at times, but her core desire in the end is loyalty. And so in our travels, because we travel full time, she'll be like, Mom, what is the plan? How
Yeah.
long is it taking? How long is it going to take us exactly? Should I bring my orange or my green backpack? I'm packing all the snacks.
Yeah.
Where are the shoes? So she wants to be prepared.
I
And
know a 6 mom too, and she is exactly like that. And actually, I had a conversation with her earlier in the pandemic, and I said something because I'm a medical family. So I'm married to a physician. I was an RN before, and so we know a lot of people around the world. We anticipated that it would happen, that there would be a pandemic, obviously not the way it happened. But then I said to her, but you would never, like, you anticipate everything, but you wouldn't have anticipated a pandemic. And she said, no, I have read on that. I knew it was going to come. And I was like, what? Okay, only a 6.
yeah. And so then the 6 it really has to, I think, especially like for 6 kids, it's really hard. I honestly, I have a lot of compassion for 6 kids because there's a lot of them nowadays. I'm noticing more and more in the male demographic, but there's definitely a lot of the female. Like, I think I'm going to overestimate here. So it's a little bit of a bold statement, but I like most people, most women I've met between ages 35 and up, at least 50% of them have been type 6s. So we
Really?
have a ton of Enneagram 6s in this world. And that's because they were raised with the programming that the world is dangerous and it's going to harm them. And so they need to provide security and loyalty. So raising a 6 kid has so much to do with helping them learn to build their own inner grounding and inner sense of security because they can look for it in the parents, which is okay, but eventually they're not going to have their parents and they can't become codependent on someone else. So they need to build that inner grounding within themselves and realize that they're going to be safe no matter what, which can be a really hard lesson to learn. It's not easy.
Yeah, to manage anxiety for sure.
And so then there's the 5 child who's also in the fear triad, and they struggle with fear, but they are the best about recognizing fear because the 6 will recognize it, but then try to protect themselves and act off of it. Whereas the 5 freezes and they just recognize all the concerns and they think if they get enough information, then they'll finally be safe. And so 5 struggle a lot with taking action. As an example, I worked with a student who was a 5 child. He was about probably 10 years old, I think, at the time I was talking to him. And he was telling me his whole plan for the future about how he's going to study robotics and go to this specific college for robotics and then work at this specific business for robotics and exactly what robots he's going to build. But if I asked him what he wants to do right now to make him happy, he didn't know. And so 5s can get so caught up in preparing for the future and keeping themselves, providing a sense of security that it's hard for them to tap into that sense of joy. So 5 children will be very easily recognizable because they're very systematic, very logical, and they can struggle a little bit with action. They'll be good at following tasks, but to take massive action can be hard, especially in teen years, where I think most 5s end up being males. There are still some females, but most are males. There's the expectation eventually for, men to talk to girls and like meet people. And that can be hard for them to do because it requires putting yourself out there and taking courage, which is why the 5's growth number is the 8.
And interesting, because I know a 5 male who's married to an 8. So the 8 is probably like, hey, I'm here. I see you. I like you. Let's go. Yeah.
So then there's the shame triad, and that's types 2, 3, and 4. And these people struggle the most with unworthiness. Yeah. So the 2, as you know, probably as a 2, that the 2 struggles with feelings of unworthiness, and they believe that if I don't serve, then I'm nothing. Yeah. And they feel feelings of unworthiness for who they are, or that they're never giving enough. And I think it's really powerful to know when your child is a type 2, because they're naturally going to seem so well-adjusted because they're learning to take care of themselves from a young age, take care of their siblings from a young age, and do everything they're told, when really they're just trying to be the best they can be because that's what they're supposed to be.
Yeah, and overcompensating, really. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So helping the type 2 tap into their individuality, because their growth number is a 4. Yeah. That creativity and what they want is going to be super powerful.
Yep.
And then the 3 is also part of the shame triad, and they feel that, like I said, that they're unworthy unless they achieve. Yeah. And so it's going to be easy to spot a 3 kid in the sense that they're going to be overachievers in the end. And they might not always be the life of the party. They're not going to want to be super social always. They can be, but they're going to be driven. And if you tell them just to rest, they're not going to take that. They have trouble resting. And then there's the 4 in the shame triad, who I think actually a 4 is very, very common nowadays. We have a lot of 4s. I think more female 4s, but there's a lot of 4s coming into this world. And because the 4 desires to be important, they can be a bit of shapeshifters. So I know a lot of 4s who see themselves as 7s because in their head, the 7 seems so important. Everyone likes the 7. I must have to be like the 7. And so they take on the persona of the 7 when really they're 4 that wants to be important. And so they always feel this sense of unworthiness that who they are themselves by themselves are not going to be enough. They must have a persona. Or on the other hand, they could take on the traits of a 3 and think, I have to be achievement driven in order to be enough. And so then they make themselves appear like 3 and so on. So the 4 is probably honestly one of the harder types to notice. But if you can just notice, is it that they want positivity? Do they want conflict avoidance? Do they want achievement? Or is it that they really deep down want to be important and matter to people?
So you're probably going to speak with an adult 4, obviously. Most of the time you're dealing with adults. Am I wrong? Yeah. So as an adult 4, then how do you tackle that? So to clarify which direction they should go toward in coaching.
So part of, I think, one of the hard things about the Enneagram journey that just as every person's on their own journey on their path is even if you know someone's Enneagram type, they might not be ready to receive the information. So a lot of 4s I've met, because they want to feel important and understood, they're usually very hesitant to admit that they're a 4. So an example, I have a friend who is a 4 to the T, and he doesn't want to admit he's a 4. So he's like, no, I'm a 7. Don't doubt me on this. When really I know deep down he wants to feel important and heard. And I could argue with him about it. I could tell him, no, here's all the reasons you're a 4. But he's not ready to receive the information. And it just helps me on my part to know. But when I'm trying to convince people and they're open-minded, I ask them to think about, it takes a lot of looking back at your childhood. So I compare a lot. And I also try to get them to pinpoint the moment where they felt like they had to be important or to be different or unique. So an example of the 4-7 mistype, which is the most common, I think, for the 4, I go, okay, so the 7 wants to avoid negativity at all costs. Do you want to avoid negativity? And they might say yes, but chances are 4s know deep down that they're very in touch with their darkness, their sadness, their emotions, because it's part of themselves. So the 7's like, oh, don't no negative feelings. Don't. Whereas the 4 is like, stereotypically like, you want to hear my sad playlist that describes every emotion that I've ever felt?
That's so true, though. And they're so creative. But I've actually, because I thought I had a 4 and now we see the 7, that is the reason why I thought, okay, she's always felt deep feelings, but seeing her in the light of a 7 is, I don't want to feel the hard feelings. And I'm like, oh, cha-ching. That's when you know you're a 7. Yeah.
Yeah. And so convincing,
good. They will go down that rabbit hole.
yes, and sometimes get stuck in it. And that's their bigger struggles, because the 4 wants so bad to be important that they talk themselves in circles about who they are. And that's why I say that Enneagram 4s seem to be attracted to my energy, because the thing they want most is just to be themselves and be accepted for it. And that's what I feel I've already done with my upbringing. And like, I was raised to just be that way. And so they're like, how are you not confused about this? You just show up for who you are and you accept it and you love it. And people love it too. Like
Yes. And that is literally with every type, that when we fully embrace who we are, no matter what you're, because you're about to speak to ones, and I know ones intimately, literally, because I'm married to one. And then it doesn't matter what Enneagram type you are, but when you fully embrace who you are, that is when people can truly connect with you. But that is where you shine. And so trying to be all the other possibilities, it's just a waste of time.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's definitely hard because, I mean, after all, the Enneagram is based off of programming, and our programming instinct is to find a partner, maintain resources, and be a part of a tribe. We want acceptance as a general rule, and our Enneagram gets us there. But that's a misalignment with our core values. Everyone has core values that they need to pinpoint. And when you live in alignment with those, some people may fall away. That's part of it.
Yes.
But not worth your time and energy.
Exactly. Because this is what I've explained many times. This was my experience, that when I was trying to be something other than I am, I was trying to make sure to get the validation of everybody around me, but I sensed that they didn't always validate me. So then I worked harder to get their validation. And I never really knew if it was true validation until I became the real me, or allowed myself to be the real me. And when I became, or allowed myself to be the real me, then there were certain people that were like, I'm out. But there were actually very few and far between. The other people felt like they really liked me then. And also I could feel that they really liked me. And I knew that they liked the real me because it was the real me. So it was beneficial all the way around. Yeah.
And I think it's so powerful in general. Like the idea of, we hear the phrase self-love a lot in the self-care community, just everything. Mm-hmm. But really processing that statement, I think, is so important, because basically what every Enneagram type struggles with is a feeling of abandonment. And it's because they abandon themselves for the sake of security. So every Enneagram type has to deal with that feeling of abandonment and come back to who they are. So how do we make ourselves not feel abandoned? We recognize the trauma we went through. We let the emotion out that was buried in there. Mm-hmm. We forgive ourselves. We have to forgive the other people, but it's really that we have to forgive ourselves for letting ourselves into that situation. And then we are acting in alignment. What do I want? Who am I? What do I feel? And what do I think? And align with that. And then you're on the path to growth and healing as whatever Enneagram you are.
Yeah, girl, got to give it another damn girl, because that's really, it is. It's very wise. And it's exactly the thing. And how did you figure that out by age 18?
The hard way, I would say. I think everyone the hard way, but it's been a lot for me, especially in the past year, where I've known my Enneagram for probably close to 5 years. And I recognize the idea that I had a feeling of abandonment and that I can't rock the boat. And it wasn't until this year that I really noticed the depths of that, of where that feeling of abandonment came from, and where that feeling of I can't have what I want. That was the root of it. That as a 9, I can't have what I want. And being raised unschooled or homeschooled, being disconnected from society, there was definitely some parts of my reality where I'd feel like, wow, I'm completely alone. I'm sitting here in my big house in Montana with no neighbors for a mile away. I don't even have any friends. My business isn't doing well. I don't even know how to get what I want. And it took a lot of leaps. One, recognizing how I felt that and like letting the emotion out over and over and over is so much of it. Often my family and I say, my mom who does coaching, we say that you have to repeat your story until you can let it go. And if you find yourself saying the story and you still feel it there, you have to keep repeating it. So it took a lot of repeating that story, a lot of just self-awareness of becoming aware of the story. And then eventually you have to put yourself back out into the world again and try. And that's what I did a lot of this year. And it definitely backfired in some senses, but it also got me to exactly where I wanted to be. And it was the last piece I needed to really be that love for myself. And then you realize that you don't need, whether you're in the anger, fear, or shame triad, you don't need anyone else to fulfill your core desire for you other than yourself.
Yeah, so true. That is so beautiful. And I'm truly excited for your life to see how it unfolds, because that is something that took me until, I don't know, 30 something to begin to understand all of the things that you said. I actually want to rewatch that section of what you just said. It's beautiful. I'm truly grateful to have met you, but I am so excited for you. Maybe it's the maternal two instinct, but because you're my kid's age, then I'm like, wow, that's super cool to know that you are in a space where you can say or identify that. And the biggest thing that I hear in that is that we abandon ourselves, we leave ourselves, and we don't realize that it is us coming home to us that we're really looking for. It's not the validation of everybody else.
Right.
So let's not forget the ones. You were going to speak to the ones, and I know that I definitely know that somebody has a one child as one of the moms here.
Yeah. So the one child is very similar to the three. One massive difference, though. While they may seem to want the same thing, perfection and achievement can seem so similar. The three wants to be the best, and they're wrapped up in their self-worth. They struggle with self-worth. Whereas the one wants perfection. And so they can seek this through more material means than the three can. Whereas the three will chase more trophies, or at least good grades. The one will chase more of like harmony in the world around them, in a sense, kind of like a nine, but through critical means. And so the one's core belief is, if I don't make the world perfect, no one else will, and then I'm going to be abandoned. So the perfectionism is strong within them. I worked with a girl who for a long time who was an Enneagram 1, and her biggest struggle was her inner critic. And so what she mainly struggled with was how this anger and bitterness kept building up within her, with her siblings and with herself, where she always just felt like she wasn't good enough. And so she had lots of creativity and passions, but she couldn't quite let herself just surrender and enjoy them, because she was always looking for what was wrong in the world, because that's what she was taught to do. So she would get mad at her younger sibling because he wasn't being organized in the household. And so she had to always do it, and she was taking on the role of the parent. And so she just frustrated all the time. So it's massively important for type 1 kids to remember how to play. And also, because they're going to want to, I think this is actually a huge point for ones, is that because no one's going to escape their core desire, helping them find a good, healthy way to fulfill that desire for perfection. So as an example, let's say you have a type 1 child and they have their own room. They can start becoming hypercritical of themselves because they're not getting good grades or doing good in sports, or they're parenting their sibling. You can give them a space of like, okay, we're going to make this corner of the house or your room where you can keep this as organized as you want. And if that makes you feel harmonious, good. And then if that's not working, to help your child channel that perfectionism, we need to start asking them why they feel the need to feel perfect. Because unfortunately, that's the hard step of recognizing your child's Enneagram, is that you have to start asking them hard questions. And I think it's something that, while it's hard, it's definitely worth it. And if you can get them to recognize the core desire within themselves, their life is going to change forever.
Yeah.
So for the one child, asking them like, you're becoming nitpicky right now. Like you're anxiously cleaning the floors and making sure everything's perfect, even though you reorganized it 10 times. What's going on?
Right.
And then if assuming they feel safe with you, which it might take
It's
for a while,
required. Yeah.
but they will let it out, and you need to just be that safe space for them where they can like open their heart up, and giving them space to be creative and play is going to be really huge for the one.
Yeah. And the tricky things with ones is that to even ask the question means that if you're asking a question, they can be receiving it in a critical way, a self-critical way. So it's really tricky. And the dance, you can only do those things if you have that safe space to really connect.
Yes. And
That,
that's another part of knowing kids' Enneagram is that I've experienced this a lot too, where my mom is an 8, and knowing her astrology as well, I tie astrology a lot into this. She has what we call a Mercury in 12th house. And it doesn't really matter what that means because it's a long thing to explain. But what it means is that brain to mouth to words filter might not always be how she thinks it is. And as a naturally aggressive,
as a mom of an 8, I totally understand what that just meant. Yeah.
and I always know she has good intentions, of course.
Yeah.
She's the I could ask for.
Yeah.
And I'll say it with no bitterness, but there's times where what she's meaning to say is like, how are you feeling? And as a 9, I just want to be asked like very gently and kindly in a safe space, like, how are you feeling? What are you up to? Giving me that permission to just word barf, because the 9's speech style is going to be basically word barf, where they have to go on the tangent in order to organize their thoughts. But instead it'll be maybe come out as, what's wrong?
Yes.
And like, get it done. Let's get it over with, move on. And so recognizing your child's Enneagram versus yours is going to be huge in your communication. So I definitely recommend knowing your Enneagram just for that reason. So like if you have a 4 child, they might honestly need to feel like they're understood by listening to their creativity and their art. That'll make them feel more heard than if you just straight up ask them, what are you feeling? A 5 needs to verbalize their concerns. And so telling them like, hey, look, I think that you're kind of worried about this. Is that right? That's like, communication is the hardest thing in the world, but it's also the most powerful.
Yeah, so beautiful. Okay, so where can we find you for Enneagram coaching? But I want to hear about what you're going to be doing for the coaching program. So just share whatever you want to share. I don't know how much time we have, so just go with it and then tell me. Okay, I'm good.
Okay. So you can go to, first of all, for more Enneagram resources, makingmindfulnessfun.com. If you open any of our Enneagram blogs, you can download the free Enneagram cheat sheets and Precision Personality Hacker mini course, where I teach you how to understand every Myers-Briggs type and Enneagram type and find yours, because these two go hand in hand. And so by knowing one, you can know the other, and vice versa. You can figure it out. So those are free cheat sheets on my website. You can join me on YouTube at Making Mindfulness Fun, and I teach about astrology and Enneagram and more. My Instagram handle is, I don't use Instagram as much because engagement sucks, the algorithm sucks, and I'm just tired of being on there. But you can find me there at Making Mindfulness Fun, and you can reach out to me there or via my email, which you can find on any of those previous platforms for coaching, which I do offer. Or you can join Be the Hero Academy. So if you go to bethehero.academy, that is my group membership that I run with my siblings and my mom and my dad to help you understand who you are, overcome your trauma. And we guide you every single day on how to understand these things and heal yourself and become a creator of your reality instead of a victim. So I talk a lot about guided talks on astrology, specific aspects, understanding your Enneagram, and I give daily texts for the astrology transits so that you can be guided and inspired.
And we record this on a day of a full moon. I found it interesting that the word create and react have the same letters together, or in the same word. Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And that is exactly what I've learned is when we're in that trauma space, we react. And when we grow and heal and forgive and don't abandon ourselves, then we move into that creating space. So it was such a pleasure having you here. So much amazing teaching from an unschooled 18-year-old. Like, I'm sorry, but I'm just like, can we just hear an amen, girlfriends? Like, and this exactly. And thanks to your mom too. I gotta say, thanks. Yeah, such a pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this talk. It was great to be on here.
Thank you. So let's just see here.